welcome to One Mission, the podcast. And today we are honored to be able to have the president of Southern Seminary, Dr. Al Mohler, who is a veteran Christian leader. His influence transcends Southern Baptist life into all of evangelical life. He is a person that I've come to know for decades now and really love and appreciate him. He is a stellar statesman among us in Baptist life and beyond. As I said, he's already given the kind of leadership to Southern Seminary that has distinguished it and an already rich history that it's had. Dr. Mohler, we're glad to have you with us today and want you to know that we don't take that lightly. We know you're a busy person, and I've got to say to begin with here that I'm an avid listener to the briefing, and I follow things that you write. So other listeners will, but they may not know you as well as I do and some others. So do you mind just beginning by giving your story, your personal testimony about conversion and call to ministry?
Well, Dr. Lance, and we've known each other for a very long time, so I'm very comfortable with just a first name basis. But, I came to faith at age 9 at Vacation Bible School. It's about as paradigmatic a Southern Baptist testimony as you can imagine. I want to honor my mom and dad. They were just wonderful Christian parents. They raised me in the nurtured admonition of the Lord. I have my cradle roll certificate and enrollment until this day. And my dad was in the grocery business. My mom was a registered nurse who just was a full-time mom. And they're in the home. They raised me. I was at everything. My dad was both training union and Sunday school director at various times and a deacon. My mom was the preschool director. I was just a volunteer, mom position. And so I just assumed that my church home was just about as much my home as my home with my parents and an extended family.
Yeah.
And I long for young people, for children to have that experience. But, I was a lost sinner and didn't know it.
Yeah.
And so I just thought I was a Baptist like everybody else. My parents are Baptist, I'm a Baptist church. I feel so much at home here. God's people have loved me, taught me. And I'll make the story short. I ended up at another Southern Baptist church for Vacation Bible School. And the reason for that is I grew up in the generation in which my mom had several children at home and she loved us, but I was the oldest of 4. And I went to everybody's Vacation Bible School.
Yeah.
And so, and that was a big thing. I all the Southern Baptist churches had Vacation Bible School. And, I made the same, food color maps of the Holy Land like 4 times in the summer. And it was a wonderful experience. It tells you something about the strength of the Southern Baptist Convention at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was at another church, and it was on the Friday of Vacation Bible School. And the pastor, who was bivocational, I didn't even have a word for that at the time. He was bivocational. He was a phosphate miner there in Central Florida. He preached the gospel, and the Lord used it. The Holy Spirit used it to call me to Christ. And I knew myself for the first time as a sinner. Heard the gospel preached very clearly by a bivocational pastor to kids, and I came to receive Christ, to confess Christ at that moment. I went to talk to my parents. They were so encouraging. They took me to our pastor, even meeting with me, over the weekend. And he was so assuring. He was a PhD. It was a very different, seminary PhD from Southern, tall steeple, Southern Baptist Church. But, he preached and taught the very same gospel, and he affirmed that in my heart. I was baptized. I went to RA camp at Lake Yale the next day after I was baptized, and I was looking forward to that, had been since I was like 6. And it was on the Friday of that week, which is just a week later, that I felt a call to ministry. And, at RA camp, you filled out a card. It was a yellow card, and the last thing on it was, if you felt a call to vocational ministry. And of course, I'm 9. They just said that if you feel called to be a preacher, so I checked that off. Okay, I felt very self-conscious about that. And then I thought, well, no one's ever going to know about that card. So, Rick, I'll just fast forward. When I was 18 years old, my pastor had retired. I called him to talk about the fact that I thought God had called me to ministry. And I'm going to get emotional here if I'm not careful. He sent me that card in the mail.
Wow.
So, and that's a testimony, by the way, to not only a local faithful Southern Baptist church, but to a state convention and to an RA camp,
right.
where, you know what? that card got all the way from RA camp to my pastor who held on to it. And that's a very affirming thing.
Yes, it is. And that's heartwarming, Al, to hear that. And I have to say that your testimony and conversion is very similar to mine. Vacation Bible School, and also Shaco, our camp, involved in that. And the call to ministry was early too. In fact, our listeners know I started being a pastor at age 18. I didn't know what a youth minister was. We were in a small church. We just had a youth director, so to speak. So very glad to hear that. You are one of the most renowned leaders that we have in Christendom in evangelical life now. So I think you're very qualified to give us some leadership lessons. And what I'd like to do is, I know in your pilgrimage, you've learned a lot. If you could highlight 2 or 3 real strong takeaways in leadership, and then I want to ask you a follow-up question that may be the flip side of that.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a book on the conviction to lead, and it just came out in the 2nd edition, I'm proud to say. And I was asked to write it. I hadn't planned to write a book on leadership. I was asked to write it, and the Lord's greatly blessed. It turns out that it's got the widest readership of anything I've written. But the reason I wrote it is because I think I do have something to say to Christians in particular, and that is the only leadership that matters is a leadership that translates conviction into corporate action.
Right.
And so it's not to translate a plan. It's not to translate just a mission goal or a corporate plan. Those things are good in and of themselves, but for Christ's people, and it's translating convictions. The most important conviction being that Jesus Christ is Lord, into corporate action. And so you asked us a couple of things. I will tell you, very early in life, I learned by intuition what the Quaker theologian Elton Trueblood called a perpetual vision of greatness. I had before me both living and dead men in particular, leaders that I was learning from. And so, among the dead were people like Moses and Winston Churchill, just to say 2 of them. In other words, I'm looking for what I can learn from these men. And then there were so many who were living. God put so many godly pastors in my life, and frankly, for the first 18 years of my life, 2, just very faithful men, just poured so much into my life. I tried to hang around them as much as possible and to learn as much as possible from them. And the same thing when I went to college there in Alabama at Samford, which Alabama Baptists made possible for me, as you know the story. They basically adopted me and made it financially possible for me to go to Samford. And I just latched on to people and tried to learn from them. And Rick, one of the reasons we know so many people in common, partly because we both, at a very young age, started hanging around with people a lot older than ourselves.
That's right.
To learn from them. And so I've tried to do that, my entire life. I think there are always some people we need to hold. I think the Bible does. I think this is exactly what the writer of Hebrews does. In that Hall of Fame of faith. I think it's exactly what you have in the Old Testament. And that's why they keep coming back to Abraham. They keep coming back to Moses. They keep coming back to Joshua. So I won't drone on here other than to say,
I think that's good.
There are so many living people too that I've just kind of said, okay, I want to watch this person very, very carefully. I want to learn from them. The older we get, the fewer are those who are, way ahead of us in time.
Right.
But as a young man, boy, I wanted to hang around with a lot of older men. I wanted to learn from them. The second thing is, I think we have to think about leadership intentionally. I don't think just accidental, non-reflective leadership lasts for very long. And so I appreciate the fact you're doing this podcast. I appreciate the emphasis on leadership you give there to Baptists in Alabama in particular. And I think it's a good thing that we actually think about this, check our understanding of leadership by Scripture, by gospel, by Christ, and then boldly lead.
Right. Well said. And our listeners, ministers and lay people alike, we enjoy hearing effective leadership lessons, but every so often we're encouraged by something that may have happened in our lives. We were trying to lead, but didn't work out as well as we thought it should. Is there a lesson or so you could offer in that regard?
About things that didn't work?
Yeah.
I'm glad to say not anything major or
Good.
historic. So I just
That's
say
good.
by the
We
grace
know
of
about
God,
it. We know.
by the grace of God,
Yeah.
I'll say that. But I think it's more. I would say my mistakes were were not seeing how much time it might take to get from A to B to C.
Uh,
I had to kind of learn how to bring people along. And it's kind of like in war. If you've got to throw 18-year-olds into battle, you don't have a lot of time to nurture and, convince. And I mean, frankly, you tell them where to go and what to do. But, if you want to build an army over time, you've got to build a leadership class. You got to build a lot of lieutenants and captains and majors. And so I hope that makes sense. I think the biggest
yeah.
thing I've had to kind of shift from is thinking, all right, I've got to shift from sending 18-year-olds into battle to, creating a generation of majors and captains and colonels who
Yeah.
can, and generals who can keep this thing going.
Yeah. And you're doing a fine job of that. I will tell you one of the things I encountered,
Mhm.
and my people around me know this, it won't surprise them, is my leadership foible, one of them at least, is impatience.
Yeah.
But as you get older, you learn more patience because it's God's timing and not ours. There are times I felt like I was trying to make something work that wasn't ready to happen, and those didn't go very well. So I appreciate you being very transparent there.
Yeah. I'll be transparent about one other thing here, Rick,
Okay.
and that is that, and I talked about this today with a younger pastor, just today over lunch.
Good.
I
Good.
said, I want to tell you the greatest fault in my leadership in my eyes, there may be other people who have a different list, but I would say in my eyes is that when I was younger in particular, I just didn't express gratitude nearly enough.
Oh,
I just
I
didn't.
agree. Yeah.
I thought people would know I was grateful,
Yeah.
but you know what? They don't know if you don't tell them. And so
That's right.
I feel gratefulness every single day to all kinds of people. And I try to say that. And I just hope I get better and better over time at communicating. I wish I could go to a lot of dead people and tell them
Yeah.
right now how
Same
grateful I
here.
am to them and for them. Yeah.
Believe me, I try to every day be intentionally grateful to someone because I
Right.
think I've neglected that. So we share that in common. We also share something else in common that we have a love for biographies, and
Oh,
particularly
yeah.
a love for Winston Churchill. And
Yes.
I, I don't
He's
do
never far.
hagiography. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't do hagiography,
Yeah.
but I will tell you, he was right about Hitler and probably wrong about India. But the man
Right.
just held things together in World War II. I know he's gotten a lot of credit because he said, I know history will be kind to me because I'm going to write it. He did a good job
Right.
of writing history. But would you like to share something that
Yeah.
happened in his life that really made an impact upon you in terms of leadership?
Yeah. I want to tell you something that happened in his life, which was his death, that had a big impact on me.
Yeah.
So I tell people, I'm going to give you the short version of this, but I tell people that I was the little boy whose grandmother gave him National Geographic subscription for his
Huh.
birthday. Okay.
Okay.
But I got the mom edited copy of National Geographic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So all
I
the
do know
naked
what you
natives
mean.
were out, and what was left in was the sharks and the snakes and the other things. And so there was an issue of National Geographic magazine that came into my life, which was about Winston Churchill's funeral. And I just didn't understand a whole lot, but I'm probably like 10 years old, and I'm reading this. And I mean, the cranes on the London docks went down voluntarily. No one orchestrated this. And these giant cranes for this shipyard, they went down as his funeral barge went by. There was a picture of the funeral assembly just going into St. Paul's Cathedral, and there's this little lady in black and holding a purse, and it was Queen Elizabeth II.
Yeah.
And National Geographic just said it was the first time in the history of Britain that a crowned head had attended the funeral of a non-royal. First time in history. And when the Queen was asked about this, she said, "Well, he did save the empire, didn't he?" And
Yeah.
so, just the little boy in me, who's all just fascinated with history, I thought, I got to know more about this man. And you've been in my study. I've got hundreds
Yeah.
of books about Churchill. I have an oil portrait of Churchill, within sight. And it's not hagiography. It's just inspiration. I think Winston Churchill had many foibles, but he stood athwart history.
Yeah.
And he did speak the truth when no one else saw the truth. He spoke the truth. He knew the greatest truth of the 20th century, and that was that ideologies like fascism, most importantly, and Nazism, had to be defeated,
Yes.
not just limited, but defeated.
Yeah.
And that the cause of human dignity and human freedom was the thing. You know, ever since 1945, there has not been a month in which a major biography of Winston Churchill has not emerged.
Yeah.
At least one a month since 1945, continuing until today. Just in the last few weeks, two excellent works on Churchill have come out. So again, Churchill's not an apostle.
I know.
I'm very dubious of the fact that Churchill was a believer. I would say as a Southern Baptist, he was an Anglican, but he
Yes.
never made a personal profession of faith in Christ.
Yeah.
But I do believe he was a great leader, and I think we as Christians have to learn how to learn from people.
Yes.
Frankly, without overclaiming things about them.
Right. Exactly. Well, I tell you, did you see the movie The Darkest Hour?
I
Did you?
did.
Yeah. And I watched Dunkirk, which hardly mentioned Churchill at all, which I thought that was rather odd. And then The Darkest Hour, and there were times I felt like the depiction of him was pretty good. There were other times I felt like Gary Oldman, the actor, missed it. Yeah. But then I asked myself, how would anyone capture that personality and that leadership that was embodied in that one leader at that particular time in history when it seemed like the apocalypse?
That's right.
So I cut him some slack, but I enjoyed watching it. But
I really think he did in retrospect. I think he did an outstanding job in the sense that I think he showed Churchill's courage and his joy.
Right.
Two difficult things for people to hold together, but Churchill held them together in a way that I think we can all as Christian leaders learn from.
Yeah. And there have been numbers of actors who have tried to pull that off, and some of them in cameo roles that just didn't work out too well. But
and the interesting thing about Churchill is that Churchill did not have a great voice. He just knew how to use it.
Yes, that is.
So, I think even in a movie, Gary Oldman's voice is a better voice than Winston Churchill's.
True.
Well, it's another good lesson for pastors, preachers, and Christian leaders. God uses even what Charles Spurgeon called a slender reed.
Yeah.
To do great things in the kingdom or great things in history. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and you and I are old enough to remember Vance Havner, and that may have been the worst preaching voice I've ever heard, but he was very popular and stirring. I enjoyed listening to it.
And the one thing is you can't unhear it.
No, nor his subtle humor, dry humor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, let me segue into something else. I was sitting one day and preparing to preach at a church, and there was a recognition of a family, a husband and wife, who had their 75th wedding anniversary, and they had the entire family to stand, and they had 6 generations there. And it dawned on me, never before in the history of Christianity have we had this many generations trying to worship together.
Right.
So that helped me understand years ago the worship wars and some of that going on, taste in music and the like, which some of that was highly unnecessary but understandable. Mm-hmm. Generationalism in leadership is here too. Younger leaders, maybe those in midlife, and those who are older but still in ministry. We have in Alabama, we have bivocational pastors, which constitute 60% of our churches now, by the way. Yeah. We have 85-year-olds still serving.
Yeah.
It's not like they're clocking out. They to the last breath they want to serve. So a quick word, if you would, of encouragement to the younger, to those in the midlife, the middle, and those who are older. Could you do that?
Not only can I do that, I'm quite eager to do that, because that's kind of my life story and a very central part of my life mission. Let me tell you, when people ask me what makes you happy, what keeps you in this, I got to tell you, I'm surrounded by young men. I'm surrounded by young, pastors who are, are called to prepare for ministry. And thankfully, as you know, our enrollment's very healthy. Thanks be to God.
Yes.
Like here on this
Mhm.
campus, I walk into chapel just now, walking, walking on the sidewalk, talking to students as I came in, talking to some students at Boyce College, 18 to 22-year-olds. And I tell people, if you can't be happy around 18 to 22-year-olds, you cannot be happy. These
Uh,
are the happiest Christian young people. And I mean, and they got everything going on that's going on at 18 to 22, but they are committed to Christ and they just make me happy. And the young men who are training for ministry, and we got young men and young women on this campus with various courses of study, and that tends to lead to other things, which means next thing you know, you got weddings, next thing you know, you got
yeah.
strollers, and it makes me so happy.
Yeah.
And so on the other hand, my whole life I've been very happy being around older people.
Same
Uh,
here.
n- Now that I'm in the category, I guess
Yeah.
I'll say older, but but
Yeah.
Rick, I will say this: I preached to a group of pastors in California just last week out of Titus, and I said, here's what just is so encouraging to me. Paul writes to Titus, and even in the salutation, he says, "My true child."
Yeah.
Well, the Apostle Paul thought of Titus and of Timothy, of whom he used the same expression, as his sons in the faith. And we have no idea about the background. We know that Timothy had a Roman father. Is not really a part of the equation. We really don't know much about Titus, but the fact is, both of them had a father in Paul. And so in speaking to these pastors, I said, I just want to tell you, this is so important to Scripture. It's in the Old Testament with Moses and Joshua. It's in the New Testament with Paul and Timothy and Titus, and it is, to be a Christian leader is it is to have both a father and a son. And I'm speaking to
Yeah.
Christian men and Christian
Yeah.
pastors in particular. We need to have fathers in the faith, and if we are faithful, we'll have sons in the faith, and we have to draw great joy from both.
Yeah.
And not only that, we're the connective tissue between the one and the other.
Praise.
So I was with a very young man today, and you know what he wanted to talk about? The people I had learned from. And so I'm talking about W.A. Criswell, Herschel Hobbs, great ties to Alabama, by the way. I was
Right.
president of the Ministerial Association at Sanford, invited him to come speak to a student banquet, and he did. And started
Yeah.
started a friendship for the rest of my life with Herschel Hobbs.
Right.
And just went down to Duke McCall, who was president of the seminary. I met when I was just a boy, and now I hold the office he held for 30 years more. All I got to tell you is, that's what they want to hear about. And I think there's something really, really important about that. I want the young men who are at the seminary to know they are following the footsteps of Moses. They're following in the footsteps of Abraham and Joshua. They're following the footsteps of Peter and Paul, and they're following in the footsteps of Augustine and Luther and Calvin and Jonathan Edwards. They're following in the footsteps of Herschel Hobbs and W.A. Criswell and a legion of others. And I want them to feel like they're a part of an army that is just forward marching. And I will tell you, as an older man, and I'll be 65 this year, so people can Google it. It's not a state secret. And all I can tell you is my greatest joy is being around younger men, and I mean, it just is fantastic. Who would miss this? Who
Yeah.
wouldn't want this? And so as I was talking to these pastors on the West Coast, I said, look, you're not Paul if you don't have Timothy and Titus. If you're the Apostle Paul, then you've got Timothy's and Titus's that you're investing in and who know you as a spiritual father. And even as we have spiritual fathers and had them, in the flesh when we were younger. And I also tell younger men, you are an orphan in ministry unless you have fathers in ministry. And Rick, I have told you this. I know I have, and forgive me for taking
That's okay.
advantage. I'll tell it again. I was president of the Ministerial Association at Sanford when I was 19 years old. I went to the Alabama Baptist Convention that was meeting in Huntsville, and I'm just a college student, and I didn't know anything, but Leslie Wright was president, and I was president of the Ministerial Association. And he needed a student, to be with him, but then he went off, and I'm alone. And I think I've told you this before. I was just a college student alone in that room. I'm just wearing the only sport coat I had and the only tie I had,
Yeah.
and I'm just standing there. And a group of 3 or 4 Alabama Baptist pastors came up and invited me to go have a meal with them. It was life
Wow.
transforming.
Yeah.
And I've told you the name of those men, and I don't know where they are right now, but I still remember the fact that as a teenager, I remembered those names. It's because they befriended a 19-year-old. And, that was a life. I just thought, okay, I'm watching these pastors together. This is a wonderful thing to be a part of. I want to be a part of this.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean that as encouragement.
And you are an encourager, among other things, and we appreciate your leadership. And we want to honor your time, Dr. Mohler or Al. I know that you are a busy fellow. And how many days were you in California? I listened to the briefing and I was trying to keep up with that.
14 days.
I
14
thought
days.
so.
Yeah, it may have been 15, but Rick, one of the things I've learned over time is that the only way I can do this job the way I need to do it is to have some travel that's in blocks where,
Yeah.
I can't fly 10 times to California
Yeah.
in good stewardship, but I did like 30 events in
Wow.
15 days.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing in Florida, the Lord's really blessed with our enrollment at Southern and
Yeah.
at Boyce College, and a large part of that is because I try to be out and among Southern Baptists. So in the next few weeks I will be all over the SBC. I'll be in Florida, and I'll be in Georgia and the Carolinas, and I love being in Arkansas and Oklahoma and everywhere Southern Baptists are, and it's just a reminder to me that whatever time we have, and I've respected you and known you for so long. You were the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Cullman, Alabama, when I was president of the Ministerial Association. And you don't remember meeting me, but I do remember meeting you. I was just a college student at the time, and I'm so thankful that the Lord brought friendship into our lives. And how thankful I am to Alabama Baptists. And as I said, at one point, in honoring Alabama Baptists, look, if you go to 1859, when the seminary was established, the most significant single donor, other than the Southern Baptist Convention, is the Alabama Baptist State Convention.
Wow, we're proud to have done that and do that. And we also, that's been echoed by Paul Chitwood at IMB in a similar way. So
Good.
Alabama Baptists are not the largest in terms of numbers. We don't have mega churches as such, and we certainly don't have as many churches as some state conventions. We're not the wealthiest, but I would make a case that we may be among the most generous, and we're glad.
Well over a century, the generosity and faithfulness of Alabama Baptist has been channeled into so many graduates of Southern Seminary and Boyce College. I just want to say thank you, and in particular for the seminary over all these years. And I hope we have also repaid Alabama Baptist by sending some really fine pastors.
You do, you have. In fact, one of them is going to do our convention sermon this fall at our our state convention. Ben Bowden, you know him.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we're glad to recognize you, Dr. Mohler, and have you on this podcast. I want to say to all of our listeners, if you are not now listening to the briefing, which is a daily weekday, every weekday kind of approach in giving good commentary on a Christian worldview, you need to download that app and listen to Dr. Mohler at some time during the day. I do it early in the morning. It's kind of my information piece as a reminder of what we need to be aware of in terms of having a very wholesome, healthy Christian worldview. And I want to say to all who have listened, we've been delighted to have one of the stellar leaders of Southern Baptist life, Dr. Al Mohler, a personal friend, but also a kind of leader that has had a very strong and weighty impact in Southern Baptist life for decades. A very bright person, but also very down-home kind of person. And thank you, Dr. Mohler, for being with us. We hope to do this again soon sometime and kind of pick up on things.
I would look forward to it. As you know, I told you, one of my principles in life is never say no to Alabama Baptists.
Well, and I want to thank you again for allowing me to be on campus in the fall of 21. We were kind of getting out of COVID. We were kind of out of it. But that was a wonderful experience to speak in chapel and then also have a leadership luncheon there and hear you speak. It was a delight. And then again, though it's been 7 years, I want to thank you for the honor of the E.Y. Mullins Award, which I don't think I deserve, but I have it hanging in my office, and I'm most appreciative of that. I want to say in passing, a little bit of addendum. I've been rereading P.W. James's biography of George W. Truett, released in 1939, 85 years ago. If we have time, we'll talk about that. A great leader with all of his flaws and foibles as well. A great leader in his day, as you are in your day. Thank you, Dr. Mohler, and thank you, listeners, for joining us on this edition of One Mission Podcast.